What's up, my wizards? Dev is my name, in case you didn't know. From Mtg, down there we like magic, and today I'm going to show you one of our world-famous double deck techs for Grixis Midrange, because this deck is very much real in Standard. It's back, in case you hadn't heard, because Grixis Midrange has not only gotten first at a Star City Games Classic, it's also gotten second at another Star City Games Classic. So the deck is undeniably real again, and I wanted to profile it for you. Problem is, even though it's one of the best decks in the meta right now, a lot of its pieces rotate out come fall. So, not only am I going to give you the deck that exists nowadays in Standard, but I'm going to give you a peek at what the deck might look like post-rotation. So, a lot to talk about. Let's go ahead and dive into it with the entire reason that Grixis is back in the first place and the whole reason to play it post-rotation, and that's Nicol B. 3 copies of Nicol Bolas in this deck because this card has also proven itself to be very much real, and again, it's the whole reason we're playing Grixis now. Now, it just turns out that Nicol Bolas is obscenely powerful, which I guess a lot of us saw coming. There were some detractors that said that the price of this card would sink like a rock as soon as it came out, but this is actually one of the few cards from Core Set that's not only retained its value, it's actually gone up a few bucks since it came out, and that's because it's everything we wanted it to be, and more. There's just too many desirable modes on this card. Not only is it a pretty aggressively costed fat flying threat, but there's also a built-in 2-for-1 that makes the opponent chuck a card. That's good enough. Period, right there. If there was nothing else on the card, it would still be a pretty playable dude, but this is also a game-winning, game-ending option. It's a win condition, all things considered. It's a huge mana sink that might take a while to get to, but if you ever flip over a Nicol Bolas, you're not necessarily guaranteed to win the game, but your opponent will very often scoop to it. At least that's what I've noticed. So it's just very tough to lose a game once you actually do have this flipped over, because it just does literally all the good things. Lots of card advantage, nails pretty much anything on the board, creature or planeswalker, as long as it doesn't have hexproof or indestructible. So it's also a pretty good thing for a planeswalker to do. It basically says destroy target thing, so that's nice. But there's also an ultimate that just wins the game on it. It's literally a game-winning ultimate, and an ability that allows you to just pull whatever out of any graveyard, which is sweet because we got a bunch of removal in this deck. So just everything the planeswalker have does is really good and will end up winning the game for you really easily. But sometimes you'll never even have to flip him. Again, just a fat, aggressive flyer your opponent has to address, and they're usually going to kill it on sight, but they will have lost a card to it regardless. But there's really no better way in Standard to follow up a turn 4 Bolas than with a turn 5 Scarab God. That's right, just when you thought this was a Nicol Bolas deck, big reveal, it's actually a Scarab God deck. But again, there's just no better turn sequence right now, or at least none that feels better, than Nicol B into Bugsy. And I like that combination because it kind of sounds like Mafia-esque to me, you know what I mean? You better keep your mouth shut or you get paid a visit by Nicol B into Bugsy, you know what? You best just better keep in line there, son, is all I'm saying. Anyway, but these cards are super powerful, independent of one another, but when put together, they're crazy. I've already talked about how they're just going to kill Nicol Bolas as soon as they get a chance to, but they've already lost a card to him. You can just windmill slam the Scarab God the next turn and be comfortable in the knowledge that you'll get your Nicol Bolas back. You won't be able to flip him over or anything, but he's still going to be a 4/4 evasive creature that gets another card out of their hand if you need to. But Beetlejuice is good on its own merits. I think it's proven that a lot over its tenure in Standard. You know, lots and lots of decks have been built around this card because it's just hands down the best late game value engine in the entire format for well over a year at this point. And might I add, by the way, it's probably the most annoying card in Standard to have to play against, too. It's just so irritating when they get a Scarab God down, you know. It has to be removed immediately and exiled to be truly dealt with, or it's just going to create all the value. If you ever get to actually untap your lands with the Scarab God in play, it opens up a whole wealth of absurd options. Not only does this, again, follow Nicol Bolas really well on turn 5, or any turn for that matter, but it's just really good with a whole wealth of creatures. You know, playing this card allows us to play a creature suite tailored to it. There's a lot of creatures in Standard right now that are really good, again, on their own, but Scarab God makes them way, way better. So let's take a look at those. And really, it's the usual suspects. We got 4 copies of Glintsleeve Siphoner, 3 Champion of Wits, and 3 Whirler Virtuoso. Because, yeah, not only is this a Nicol Bolas deck, it's also a Scarab God deck, and it's an energy deck, too. So, a lot of different themes working here, but they work really well together. Glintsleeve Siphoner, great early threat that can draw us some cards. Always sweet in a mid-range deck, so we'll take that, and it helps out with the energy theme, obviously. Same thing with Whirler Virtuoso. 3 energy is nothing to sneeze at. That fuels Ether Hub all day, which is pretty sweet, and can even draw all your cards off a Glint Sleeve Siphoner when your upkeep rolls around. So we'll take all the energy we can get, but this also converts into Thopters and still plays really well against your Bomat Couriers and Earthshaker Kenras and other red creatures of the world. But the deck also plays one copy, in the main deck at least, of Torrential Gearhulk. We've got 13 different instants for Tori to pull out of our graveyard, and all of them are awesome for Tori to pull out of our graveyard. Plus, this is a finisher, you know, a huge 5/6. Pretty decent stats right there, kid. The flash is really nice, you know. Bringing this in during your opponent's combat step is still as abusive as it ever was, you know. You're going to have to apologize after you do that because it's just silly to Torrential Gearhulk, Vraska's Contempt that guy, block your 3/3 or whatever. It's just gross. It's still a disgusting play, and we can still do it for the next couple of months, so why don't we? We'll play Torrential Gearhulk because not only is it awesome when we play it out of our hand, but we've got Scarab God in this deck to get it back at instant speed and recast yet another instant for us. But let's get to the non-creature stuff the deck plays, because there's actually a pretty varied list of non-creature options that we have available to us. So let's get to all this stuff here, starting with the one copy of Liliana Death's Majesty, because this is pretty easy to explain. This is just parity with the Scarab God. It's kind of a fourth copy of Beetlejuice without having to actually play a fourth copy of Beetlejuice. It does something very, very similar, pulls creatures and stuff out of the graveyard. That's nice. But it's also a little more versatile. You know, for our 5 mana, we can also just create creatures every turn, fuel further, you know, graveyard strategies. And if we do that enough, we'll eventually get a one-sided Wrath, which is sweet. And that's all stuff that the Scarab God can't do. So it's nice to pack at least one copy of Lily. There's also the fact that this can reanimate a Nicol Bolas and still allow that Nicol Bolas to flip, which Scarab God can't do, so that's nice. But it's also a way to reanimate a creature immediately, as soon as you play it. And Beetlejuice can't do that unless you have like 9 mana. All of the mana. So there's plenty of ways that Liliana is favorable over the Scarab God in certain situations. But the rest of the non-creature stuff really is just like removal and some light counter magic. So let me take you through all that real quick, because most of it's pretty rote. You know, we've got 3 copies of Magma Spray, 3 copies of Abrade, 2 copies of Harness Lightning. Magma Spray is a concession nowadays, mostly for Scrap Heap Scrounger. We do hate that card, and lots of decks play it, not just red-black anymore. The mono-green deck is really, really important right now, and it plays a bunch of Scrap Heap Scroungers too. So Magma Spray is at a premium nowadays. As far as the Abrade, not only can we take out the Scrap Heap Scroungers with Magma Spray, we can take out the Heart of Kieran's with the Brave. You know, again, not only does red-black play Heart of Kieran, but the mono-green deck that's rising up the ranks very quickly also plays Heart of Kieran, and we hate that card. So we'll play some main deck of Braids to be able to deal with it and other small, you know, 3 toughness or less creatures. And Harness Lightning fits in well to give us 5 total pieces of, you know, 2 mana instant speed removal. That's nice for covering the early game, but Harness can go a little bit bigger when we need it to, or a little bit smaller when we needed to, and leave energy behind for Ether Hub or Glint Sleeve or whatever. And we get the secret mode in this deck. You know, we get Whirler Virtuoso, so sometimes Harness Lightning can just convert into a Thopter when you need it to. But we're not done with removal here. We've got 1 copy of Unlicensed Disintegration and 4 copies of Contempt, which I don't have to explain at all. This is just the best removal piece in Standard, and maybe one of the best cards in Standard, period. So you play all 4, no questions asked. And there's Unlicensed in there, which looks a little weird, but this is just slightly better than Murder for us to play, you know, because it basically has the text of Murder. But if we've recast it with a Torrential Gearhulk, or if we've got a Thopter in play from a Whirler Virtuoso, this can also bolt them to the face. So why not play this over Murder? And finally, we'll finish with that light counter magic I mentioned. We've got 2 copies of Supreme Will and 1 copy of Commit to Memory, which is actually a really good answer for some stuff that we can't otherwise answer. You know, this can get Vinemare on the stack, which is a really good card against us. In case you didn't know, I'll talk about Vinemare a couple of times in this video because it's very difficult and imperative for us to answer that card. So this is a way to do it while it's on the stack. Same thing with Supreme Will, by the way. That's important. But Commit can also nab, you know, Rekindling Phoenix and put it a couple of cards down. Other cards that are good against us like Ronus, Hazaret. This is great. You know, if we can't nail it with Vraska's Contempt, we can nail it with Commit. And Memory is awesome for a late game refill. And note that we do have access to the oldest trick in the book at this point, which is Torrential Gearhulk recasting Memory out of the graveyard. Yes, it can do that, even though Memory is a sorcery. We've been through this a couple of times. The card can still do it. It's legal. Now, this deck plays 26 lands currently, and the breakdown is really good color-wise. There's 20 black sources, 15 red sources, and 15 blue sources. So we're really not at a loss. The mana looks pretty fine right now, and it even lets us play Field of Ruin without losing too much in the way of different sources. Now the sideboard's easy. We've got Chandra's Defeat in there to take out Chandras and other red creatures, but also Chandras. Duress against control, negate against control, and combo decks like God for His Gift. Same thing with Duress, by the way. We've got a Jace's Defeat, not only to deal with control decks, but also counter the Scarab God. That's nice for 2 mana. A Braid is in there to bring in against not only Heart of Kiran, but the more and more popular mono-blue Artifacts deck that uses Psy and Aetherflux Reservoir. That deck is picking up a little bit of steam the last couple of months here, and a Braid is really valuable against it too, so I think it earns a sideboard slot. We've also got Argel's Bloodfast in there, which is amazing when combined with the Scarab God, in case you haven't run across that interaction yet. When you actually flip it over, it's crazy with the Scarab God. Sack a creature, bring that creature right back in token form. Sack it again if you need to. It's totally fine. This is just worth an awful lot of life once you get it flipped over. And it's worth a lot of cards against control and other slow-rolling decks. But there's the Doomfall, in case you didn't see it yet. You know, Doomfall, a great answer against control and against cards like Vinemare that we really, really have a hard time dealing with and must deal with. But we've also got Hour of Devastation to take out those Vinemares. Just another answer, plus all the other creatures in that deck, besides Galta, you know. And all the creatures in mono red, you know, red black. There's just a lot of reasons to want to run a sweeper like this. Kills Ronuses, Hazarets, all that. Hour of Devastation is a premium sweeper. We will play that. And here are the power rankings for the deck. A final score of 69. There's a reason that the deck is so good right now in Standard, because it's just packed with extremely powerful cards. It's a proven strategy. Grixis Energy was always good. Nicol Bolas was the pick-me-up that it needed to have another good threat and a dense threat too. That does a lot of different things, you know. It's a fat flyer, card advantage in a way, you know, 2-for-1s them, and wins the game. So it's another win button for the deck. It's just everything the deck wanted. So that's the main reason Grixis Energy is back, but it was always a ridiculous deck that just has the best late game in Standard. But the hitch here, obviously, is that the deck is like $385 to build right now, and if you didn't already have most of the pieces for it, it might not be worth it to you because there's only a couple of months. It might still be worth watching this profile of the deck because you might run into it. You might have to play against it at a Classic or an Open or an F&M, who knows. So it's important to at least know what the deck can do, but it might be a little too much to spend on cardboard with only a couple of months left to play most of the pieces in the deck. So, in the interest of that, I'm gonna show you another list of what I think this deck might look like post-rotation when it loses a lot of its pieces, but it's still worth it to play Nicol Bolas because it's still going to be good enough, more so than good enough actually, after rotation. When we lose a bunch of sets, we don't have quite as many powerful cards because the sets we're losing are like 2 of the best blocks we've seen in a long time in terms of sheer power level. So we're losing a lot of really good cards, which means there just won't be that same density of amazing cards in Standard. That makes Nicol Bolas even better because it's still going to be, you know, at that point, a big fish in a small pond. So it's really desirable looking post-rotation, especially considering we lose Fatal Push. You'll never lose your Nicol Bolas to a Revolted Fatal Push ever. That feels like a blowout, and it won't ever happen again come fall. So that's awesome. And we won't have Heart of Kiran anymore. We won't have a creature that matches up to Nicol Bolas in stats but comes down 2 turns before it. So I think there's going to be even more reasons to play Nicol Bolas after Standard. So let's take a look at what that deck might look like. Now here's where things get very different from the first deck, because we're kind of forced into that. You know, again, pretty much all of the pieces from the existing Grixis Energy deck rotate in just 2 months. So we have to really radically, you know, reinvent the way we look at building this deck once rotation hits. What are the best pieces we can play? Well, it turns out, in my estimation, we just build a Dragon's Shell in the Grixis colors. So we're also going to play 4 copies of Demanding Dragon and 3 copies of Sarkhan. Now, Sarkhan is much, much better in practice than I thought he would be, and I've already played this card for the 5-color Dragons deck a few weeks back, and I was impressed by it then. You know, it definitely needs dragons to be of full value, but just being able to rummage off of this is great. You know, amazingly, these colors don't have a whole lot of really good ways to draw cards post-rotation. Sounds crazy, you know, we've got a couple of good ways to do it, but nowhere near as many good ways as we have now. And a card like Sarkhan is a great way to see more cards in this color combination. So Sarkhan's good even if you're not trying to cast dragons, but if you are, this can cast Nicol Bolas, no questions asked on turn 4, even if you don't drop a land, and it can get you to Demanding Dragon a turn early, and Demanding Dragon is probably going to be pretty important in the the upcoming format. I still think mono green is going to be a very real deck post-rotation, so this is a good way of taking out, Vinemare, because we can kill just about everything else in that entire deck except Vinemare, and in those situations, Demanding Dragon forces them to either get hit in the face for 5 damage and keep their Vinemare, or get rid of their Vinemare. Now remember, if they keep their Vinemare and get hit for 5 in the face, you've got Demanding Dragon to block Vinemare and trade with it in combat, so they basically took 5 damage for no reason. I think Demanding Dragon's going to be a great option, not only against Vinemare, but just as a huge 5/5 punishing body with a pretty decent enter the battlefield trigger post-rotation. So I like this card, I like the way it's performed in this deck, and I'm not ashamed of playing it. It seems like it actually is going to take Glorybringer's place once it rotates out. Now, we're actually not quite done with creatures in this deck, but I'll pick back up on those a little bit later. First, I want to go through the removal suite and some of the counter spells that we're playing in this deck, because it's all pretty straightforward, just like the existing version of the deck. So let me show you the 3 copies of Shock, the 4 copies of Lightning Strike, and the 1 copy of Cast Down to start things off. Now, Shock and Lightning Strike aren't quite Magma Spray and Abrade, but sometimes I don't mind having these against control decks and things that, Spray and Abrade are completely dead against. These don't play creatures game 1, We at least have some play in these cards against those decks in game 1, so I don't mind having Shock or Lightning Strike, because I can just aim for the face when we need them to. Plus, come rotation, we won't have to worry about exiling Scrap Heaps or killing Heart of Kiran's in Game 1, so in a way, these are much better cards once rotation comes. And the Cast Down is mostly in there for Steel Leaf Champion. Again, I am very worried about this mono green deck, you guys. Not only is it really good right now, but it's going to have really good options, even post-rotation, and I think that deck is going to be one of the best decks in Standard. Calling it right now, but who knows? Who knows what Ravnica brings? But the deck is just looking really swell to me, is all I'm saying. And we need an option for Steel Leaf Champion in Game 1. I think this is a pretty good way to deal with it, outside of having to spend 4 mana on Vraska's Contempt, which we are also playing the 4 copies of in this deck, because it's one of the few cards that we don't lose to rotation and will still want 4 copies of, even once we get to the new format. We won't have to worry about exiling gods or anything, but there will still be Rekindling Phoenix, and that is a jerk of a card to deal with, plus Teferi, Karn, bunch of Planeswalkers, and other problematic creatures that we want to deal with. So Vraska's Contempt should still be a 4 of, because it's probably still going to be the best removal piece in the format. Aside from that, though, we're also going to make room for 2 Spit Flame, which I don't want to play a bunch of copies of. We do have, though, 7 different dragons in this deck, so it's very likely that we'll get to play Spit Flame twice, at least in a game, like the same copy of Spit Flame twice in one game, and that is really good value to play the same removal spell twice against any aggro deck, and note that this too can kill Steel Leaf Champion, which is definitely something worthy of noting. But in terms of counter magic, we're going to play 2 copies of Essence Scatter and 1 copy of Syncopate in the deck. Essence Scatter is another good option against Steel Leaf Champion, Vinemare even, just a bunch of creatures that we don't have a whole lot of good options for, Again, we lose gods, and we won't have to worry about Bugsy or Hazaret, Ronus, any of that, but there's still a bunch of bothersome creatures that we would rather just counter than ever let hit the battlefield in the first place. So I think Essence Scatter looks pretty strong in a format that's probably going to be dominated mostly by creature decks. So I'm going to make the room for a couple of copies of it and a Syncopate, because it's kind of a 3rd copy of Essence Scatter early in the game, and it can counter non-creature stuff like Teferi a little bit later. And the final non-creature card in the deck is the 1 copy of Argel's Bloodfast, which I do think is a soft slot, but I wanted something that draws us cards. And it was either this or Anticipate, maybe Search for Azcanta, which is possibly a better card, but even the existing decks don't play Search. However, we play fewer, creatures in this deck. Might be worth playing Search for Azcanta. So I'll leave it up to you, but my favorite currently is Argel's Bloodfast. Not only because it's decent when flipped, but before it's flipped, it draws us a lot of cards against control and other decks that we don't really have to mind our life total against. So Argel's was my pick, but there's a few different things you could do in this slot if you wanted to draw some cards. But to pick back up with the creatures, we are playing a couple of copies of Rekindling Phoenix in the deck, because Rekindling Phoenix is going to be maybe the best creature in the format once things rotate here. Again, no idea what Ravnica brings, but Rekindling Phoenix is one of the best creatures hands down right now, and I would imagine that in a smaller pond, it's going to get even better. But the weirdest card in the deck will finish off the deck here. Now, this is a soft slot. Let me point that out. If you can think of something better for this slot, by all means, go ahead and do it. But I wanted a 3-drop because we're thin at that slot, and I wanted a creature because I wanted a little bit more in the way of bodies on the battlefield in this deck to make it a true mid-range deck. So with that in mind, here it comes. I'm playing 4 copies of Exclusion Mage here, and there were a few things I thought of for this slot. I looked really hard at Captain Lannery Storm. I feel like that would be really good to help get us to our Nicol Bolas, even without having to play a land. So I thought that was okay, and Lannery would make the deck more aggressive. All of that's decent. But in the end, I feel like this was definitely the best choice because it's another removal piece. You know, it helps wreck our opponent's tempo, which is exactly what we want. And, by the way, another reason this is in the deck is because it's really good to follow up Exclusion Mage with Nicol Bolas. If they don't replay the thing that you sent back to their hand on the next turn, they're very likely going to lose it to Nicol Bolas' Enter the Battlefield trigger. And, you know, if they decided to play the thing you bounced, well, then they left juicy stuff in their hand that they didn't play. So it's just really good to follow up Exclusion Mage, a bounce creature, with a creature that makes them chuck a card. That's a really good interaction. Now here's our mana base. We're still playing 26 here, and this is the hardest thing to figure out about the deck post-rotation, is how to make this mana work. But not to worry, Ravnica will almost assuredly bring some rare-level dual lands that we can play. 16 red is the top of our sources here, but we've also got 14 black to help cast Vraska's Contempt and Nicol Bolas and stuff out of the sideboard. And we've got 13 blue because it's our least used color in this list. But here's the sideboard for the post-rotation list, and this too is pretty self-explanatory. Shock is in there to make sure we have another option against very low-to-the-ground decks. That'll be pretty good against us. We've also got Duress and Negate in there, the old standbys against Control. We're in the colors to play these, and they're both some of the best sideboard cards that ever existed. So let's play them. But we've also got another Argyll's Bloodfast to help draw cards against Control. 2 Treasure Map, which I really wouldn't mind trying in the main deck. But I'm just not quite sure about it. But Treasure Map will help us fix our mana. That's going to be important, at least with the existing mana base that we can build post-rotation right now. Fixing mana is going to be important. Plus, it's another way to draw cards. And once we do flip it over, getting all that treasure helps us transform in Nicol Bolas. So there's just so many good things about Treasure Map, not to mention the scries and the drawing cards when we need to. We've also got the Eldest Reborn in this sideboard, which is usually in the sideboards of the existing list. But honestly, I know I'm a little pretentious in saying this, but I feel like those slots can be used better in the existing sideboard because what an Eldest Reborn does is very similar to what a card like Liliana or Scarab God does. We already have late game value in that deck, but we don't have it in this deck. Eldest Reborn is actually one of the better options for late game reanimative value. Is reanimative a word? But once rotation hits, we won't have Lily or the Scarab God anymore, and Eldest Reborn becomes one of the best cards at doing this, so I'll play it in the board. And we'll finish off the copy of Banefire to embarrass Control in the very, very late game. You know, this is basically an uncounterable game-winning option against Control on turn 14, so I just don't see any reason not to make room for a copy of this on the board. But here are the power rankings for this list. A final score of 68, because we lose a step in the resiliency category, you know. We can still play a Demanding Dragon or a Nicol Bolas late game and just jump back on board. All that's great. They can swing a game in a hurry. But we don't have the Scarab God or Liliana to really give us crazy late game resilience. So we lose a step there, but pretty much everything else is on par. You know, we've still got amazing versatility with, you know, a number of fat threats in the deck, but also a bunch of, you know, counter magic and removal to help keep the board clean, and even a bunch of hand destruction and stuff. So we were a really versatile list. A lot of defense too, decent, you know, synergy, because we've still got the dragon theme going, so this deck has a lot going for it, especially in terms of power. If you're looking for a competitive deck to play, this is going to be a good option post-rotation, and competitive standard decks are usually in this range. So if you're interested in either playing or just viewing the first deck or this deck, make sure you click the very first link in the description. That'll take you over to my sponsors at TCG Player, where you can view the deck list in a compact form and buy any pieces you need for either deck if you're interested in playing one of them. And with that, just do the YouTube stuff on your way out. You know, make sure you like the video if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Lots of deck techs coming up after this, plus a bunch of other stuff. There's list videos coming up soon. You know, before you know it, it'll be spoiler season for Ravnica. So get in there and subscribe. Hit the bell for the notifications. And if you can, support me on Patreon. I'll only ask for $1 a month, but Just a quick note to my $5 Patreon subscribers. Your signed cards will be in the mail on Monday. You should have them within the week, so look forward to those. But in any case, pretty sure that's all for now. Unless you wanted to follow me on Twitter, you could do it at SVMTGDev. But pretty sure that's all I got. So I'm done jawing. Take to the comments section. Let me know how you felt about this stuff down there. And I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dead from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.